So, within a single minute of scrolling through social media, a young person might see a breaking news alert, a humorous video, an advertisement, and a graphic war clip. After that, they might switch to a video game involving battles or simulated killing. Later that week, they might go with their friends and watch a horror movie with very intense scenes. Each of these experiences contains some level of violent content. That raises the question: how do young minds process such frequent exposure to violence across different types of media? So today I will explain the relationship between media consumption and desensitization to violence among youth using research and factual information. So to begin, media consumption refers to the amount of media individuals use and the type of media they interact with, such as social media, television, movies, and video games. Desensitization to violence is a psychological process in which repeated exposure to violent images or experiences leads to reduced emotional responsiveness. So this topic is very important because the youth of today consume more media than any previous generation, and understanding how this exposure affects their emotional reactions is essential for accurately describing their experience in today's digital environment. So my goal today is to explain what the research shows, not to convince any audience of any particular viewpoint. So how does desensitization work? So it's based on a gradual decrease in emotional and physiological responses after repeated exposure to the same type of stimulus. In this case, the stimulus is violent media. When a child or adolescent first sees violent content, they might experience strong reactions such as discomfort, fear, or concern. Over time, if the exposure continues, these reactions tend to lessen. A study conducted by Fonte in 2009, published in the journal Aggressive Behavior, provides empirical support for this process. According to Fonte, even short-term exposure to violent media reduced physiological responses in youth participants. So this means that their bodies produced weaker emotional reactions the more they viewed violent images. The researchers observed changes in indicators such as skin conduit conductance, which measures arousal. This study demonstrates that desensitization can begin during brief exposure, not only after long-term media use, but anytime. These findings show how desensitization functions on a psychological and biological level. The process does not require extreme or graphic violence. Instead, it emerges from repeated encounters with violent scenes, regardless of whether the content is fictional or realistic. So, understanding media habits among young people or youth, helps explain how desensitization can develop. Many youth interact with media daily across multiple platforms. Social media feeds frequently include short clips that show real-world violence, such as fights, accidents, or news footage. These videos often appear between unrelated posts, which means youth encounter them quickly and repeatedly. Video games are another common source of repeated exposure to violent content. Many popular games for teens involve stimulated fighting or combat as part of their gameplay. Movies and television shows also contribute, as violence is a common feature for action, thriller, and horror genres. Because this content appears in so many forms and across so many different platforms, youth may encounter violence without intentionally seeking it out. This pattern of consumption creates a setting where repeated exposure is highly likely, which is one of the conditions associated with desensitization. So, several studies have examined how repeated exposure to violent media relates to emotional responses and cognitive reactions in youth. A major study by Krahe, published in 2011 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, explored the link between habitual media violence exposure and desensitization. According to Krahe, adolescents who regularly consumed violent media showed lower emotional sensitivity when viewing violent images during the study. The research also found associations between frequent exposure, aggressive thinking patterns, and self-reported aggressive behavior. The authors did not claim that media directly causes violent behavior. Instead, they documented correlations between exposure and changes in emotional and cognitive responses. Combined with previous findings, this research supports a consistent pattern. When youth engage with violent media frequently, their emotional reactions tend to decrease over time. These findings contribute to a factual understanding of desensitization as a measurable psychological response. So, examples for everyday life also illustrate how desensitization may appear behaviorally or emotionally. For instance, many adolescents view videos of real-world violence online, such as school fights, dangerous stunts, news footage, or even war clips, without showing visible discomfort. This response does not prove desensitization by itself, but it aligns with patterns described in research. Teachers and school staff sometimes report that students appear less reactive when discussing violent incidents shown in the media. Additionally, in digital spaces, youth may treat violent videos as casual entertainment, reacting with humor or indifference. These examples reflect what research describes: a reduction in emotional responsiveness after repeated exposure. Again, these observations do not make claims about behavioral change or moral impact. They simply illustrate ways in which desensitization can appear in daily media environments, consistent with findings from published studies. So, to summarize, desensitization to violence refers to a reduction in emotional and physiological reactions after repeated exposure. Youth today consume media across many platforms, which creates very frequent opportunities for exposure to violent scenes. Different researches demonstrate that reduced emotional responses can occur even after short-term exposure. They also say that habitual exposure is associated with lower emotional sensitivity and specific cognitive patterns. Understanding this relationship provides a factual basis for examining how digital media environments influence youth. The purpose of this information, again, is to not persuade, but to explain what current research shows about the interaction between media consumption and desensitization to violence. Thank you so much for listening.